The Little Thief by John Cronshaw, a Dawn of Assassins prequel. The market square buzzed with movement and chatter, as Fedor let out another yawn. He adjusted his weight on the bench, trying to get some life back into his numb buttocks. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Melita nodded. He scanned the men and women browsing market stalls, his eyes landing on a shoeshine boy, bringing back memories of his old life with the priests, cleaning shoes for a pittance. "I just think..." "There." She cocked Fedor a smile and gestured to an adolescent girl weaving between the crowds. She wore her hair in a black braid, her dark eyes stark against pallid flesh. Her clothes seemed thin and worn, too thin for winter. "You sure?" "That's the one." She rose to her feet and signaled across the market to Lev waiting near the steps up to the arena. Fedor and Melita trailed the girl, keeping enough distance so she wouldn't notice them following. "It looks like she's going in for the cut," Melita said. Fedor closed in on the girl as she snatched a coin purse from a man's belt. Slipping behind her, he plucked the purse from her hand and dropped it into Lev's pocket as Melita seized the girl's wrist and marched her towards the tunnel leading to the docks. Following behind, Fedor glanced back to see Lev tapping the man's shoulder and handing him his purse back. Fedor grinned to himself. It wasn't every day Lev handed money back to a mark. But of course, this wasn't about finding a mark, this was about recruitment. Lev joined his side as Fedor strode along the docks, trailing 20 or so paces behind Melita. The girl matched Melita's pace without protest or fuss. "That went better than expected," Lev said. "Thought she'd scream or try to run or something." "You think Melita said something to her?" "You know how she is." They followed the tunnels down to the canal, catching up with Melita at the den's entrance. The girl stood next to her, not protesting, her arms folded, and looked up at Lev and Fedor. "This is Hanna," Melita said, opening the door. "Hanna, this is Lev and Fedor. They're with me." The girl nodded and followed Melita inside. Fedor made his way to the common room and joined the others. He squeezed on the sofa between Lev and Onwith. He inclined his head in greeting to Yorick, who stood leaning against the wall, watching. Melita offered Hanna a seat on a pine chair. "What you want from me?" Hanna asked, taking a seat, her voice small but defiant. Melita smiled at the girl. "We've been watching you for a while. You've been pickpocketing in the market for the past few weeks." "Can't prove nothing." "You have nothing to worry about." Yorick leaned forward and grinned. "We are all thieves here." "It's true." Onwith got up and ran a hand back through her hair. "We're a gang. Best gang in the city, that's for sure. I mean, I've not been in other gangs to know, but I'm pretty sure this one's the best. In fact, I know it's the best because I'm in it." Her grin dropped at Hanna's stony expression. "Don't need no gang." "Course you do. Things are better in a gang. If you work alone, no one looks out for you. We look out for each other and do jobs together, which means we make more because we work as a team. Make a lot more doing it like this than alone. I started off alone and it wasn't good, but it's good now. That's why we work together." Hanna shook her head. "I do all right." Lev laughed. "Trust me, you don't." He met her gaze. "We clocked you from a mile off. Your technique's as sloppy as a bad shit." "Do you run with anyone?" Melita asked. "Gunter." Yorick and Onwith exchanged a look, and Melita nodded. "We know of him," Fedor said. "You know it'll only be a matter of time before he gets you on the game." Hanna folded her arms. "He looks after me." Melita sniffed. "For now." She knelt on one knee in front of Hanna, her voice softening. "Listen, we look out for kids like you. We get them away from bad people like Gunter." "Gunter's all right." "He isn't." "You going to tell her what we're offering?" Lev asked. "I'm getting to that." Melita took in a breath. "We're looking for people like you to join us. We're always on the lookout for new members." "So?" Hanna shrugged. "We can train you. We can feed you, and you can stay here. We share whatever we make." Melita smiled. "And no one will make you do things you don't want to do." The tension evaporated from Hanna's shoulders as she studied each member of the gang in turn. "You'd do that? For me?" "Yes." "I don't get why you would." Melita shrugged one shoulder and gestured to the others. "We've all had it hard. We know what it's like out there, and we know what people like Gunter do to pretty girls like you." "Not pretty." You are. And in a few years you'll be stunning. But we're not a charity. We'll give you a leg up so you can help yourself. You eat with us. You live with us. You work with us. You want me to live here? Melita nodded. Doesn't seem that great. Lev leaned forward. When you're getting good coin from jobs, you can get beds in the inns or boarding houses or whatever. Good to know this place is here, though, if things get tight. There's always a bed and a meal. Hanna wrung her wrists and she glanced back to the door. Gunter won't like it. We can talk to Gunter, Melita said. It is very good arrangement, Yorick said. I do my thing. I help with big jobs. I am never hungry. And Lev is not always a massive prick. Whatever, mate, you're just jealous. Hanna looked between them. You robbers or something? Fedor shook his head. Not robbers. We never rob. We run scams, prop bets, burglaries. What's a prop bet? We can teach you all that, Fedor said. What do you... Thunderous knocks echoed through the den. Melita got to her feet and frowned. Are we expecting anyone? Nope. Lev got up and went to the door. The common room dropped quiet as Fedor inclined his head, trying to make out the male voice. The voices approached and Hanna flinched at the sight of a bulky man with pale skin and white salt locks standing in the doorway. Gunter, this is everyone. Lev closed the common room door. Everyone, this is Gunter. There you are. Gunter's eyes fixed on Hanna. Come on. He jerked his head, gesturing behind him. Hanna remained silent, her back stiff, her jaw tight. Melita stepped forward and smiled. Gunter, I don't think we've had the pleasure. I know who you are. He eyed Melita with a leer. Hanna's with me. He looked over to the girl. And we're leaving. Yorick moved between Gunter and Hanna and turned to Hanna. Do you want to go back with Gunter? Hanna didn't answer. She is very afraid, Yorick said, shifting his attention to Gunter. But if she wants to go with you, she can go. He stepped aside, clearing a path. It is her choice. We will not stop her. Hanna didn't move. Come on, you little bitch. Yorick blocked his path as Gunter stepped into the common room. I've got shit to do. I don't have time for your crap. Melita shrugged. It looks like she's staying here. Gunter grinned. Is this how you want to play it? We just want what's best for the girl. Melita held out her hands. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal, huh? He scratched the back of his neck. You can have her. He turned to leave, then stopped. But you're going to have to do something for me. Melita nodded. Only seems fair. Get me 1,000 krones and she's yours. Fedor gaped at the demand. You can't be serious, Lev said. Melita gestured for him to stop and turned to Gunter. We don't have that kind of money. Then I suggest you find a way of getting it. You've got 3 days. I'm either getting my cash or I'm getting the girl. Melita licked her lips. 3 days. 3 days. Melita shook his hand. Done. Pleasure doing business. Gunter pointed at Hanna and backed out of the common room. I'll see myself out. When the door slammed shut behind him, Melita let out a sigh and smiled at Hanna. Would you like me to show you around? Hanna nodded. I said Gunter wouldn't be happy, didn't I? You did. But we can deal with him. Lev shook his head. How are we supposed to come up with $1,000 in 3 days? Melita smiled and squeezed his shoulder. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Right, boss. He let out a sigh and turned to the others. Let's have some ideas. That night, Fedor, Lev, Onwith and Yorick moved into position around Nordturm's second biggest moneylender. Fedor knew that Nordturm Loans was an impenetrable fortress patrolled by guards and wyverns, but Quick Crones was quiet, in a back corner of the lower city's commercial district. Onwith gave the signal from her rooftop perch, above a Ples den, as Fedor and Yorick went around the back of the moneylenders. Fedor waited in position, his back flush against an alleyway wall. He slipped out when Yorick appeared and strode towards the target building. Yorick signalled that all windows were barred and gestured to the front door, thick and inlaid with wrought iron. Lev kept a lookout on the corner as Fedor stepped up to the front door. Glancing over his shoulder, he slipped a skeleton key into the lock and wriggled it inside, feeling the shape of the lock through his fingertips. He held his breath. The tumbler clunked and he pushed the door slowly open. Inside, Fedor's eyes adjusted to the darkness. The stench of something rotten caught his nose. A counter surrounded by a cage stretched across the tiled floor. He groped along the bars until he found the first lock. He slid the skeleton inside, opening it with a click. He stood in silence, listening. Footsteps moved inside. "You all right, mate?" Lev whispered. Fedor nodded and gestured to one of the newer-style locks. Lev went to work with a screwdriver and bobby pins, and after half a minute grunting and muttering to himself, the lock clicked and the cage rattled open. They pushed inside the cage and searched around the shelves and under the counter for the safe. "I thought you said they kept it behind here," Fedor said. "They did." He barged Fedor aside and patted the counter. "They must have moved it." 33. Yorick's voice came hushed through the door. "Shit." Fedor slipped outside as Lev barreled behind him. "What's up?" Yorick gestured to a grey wyvern watching them from a rooftop. "We need to go." Fedor led the others back through the city, slowing down to a leisurely pace when he saw no signs of the wyvern. "I swear that wyvern's following us." "It is just wyvern," Yorick said. "All wyverns are same." "Yorick's right," Lev said. "You're just being paranoid, mate." Fedor glanced back over his shoulder. "I don't know." "What are we going to do about getting the money?" Onwith asked. Yorick shrugged. "We go another night. Make sure there is no wyvern before we do job." Fedor shook his head. "It's no good. They must take the money out at night." "Maybe there is basement," Yorick said. Lev sidled up to Fedor. "I don't think that's a good idea." Fedor shrugged. "You're right. It would look pretty dodgy if we went back scouting for a cellar." "I was thinking more about getting trapped if the watch arrives. Either way, we need to think of something else." "Melita should have told Gunter to piss right off," Lev said. "Who's he to go round selling people like that?" "If it keeps him off our backs, it'll be worth it," Fedor said. "Yeah, until he comes back wanting more." Lev let out a sigh. "People like that are parasites, mate. You give in to them once and they keep coming back to suck you dry." "What are you saying?" "I'm not saying anything, really. Just don't see why we're out risking our necks on a job for that arsehole." Moonlight shone through the sea gate as they marched along the docks. Ships bobbed on the water. Fedor considered the ships for a long moment, wondering what kinds of riches they contained. The merchant ships might hold money or valuable goods. "You coming?" Lev asked. "Yeah." Fedor yawned. "Let's get a good night's sleep and try something else tomorrow." Lev patted Fedor's back. "Good plan." Fedor leaned back on the sofa and placed his breakfast plate down on the table. "How are you getting on?" Hanna looked up from her bowl and shrugged. "All right. Melita's been showing me a few things." "What do you think?" "Seems all right. Wait until Yorick teaches you cards. That's when the real fun starts." The girl nodded and turned her attention back to her breakfast. "So, what's the plan?" Lev asked. "Not sure. I was thinking..." He looked up when someone knocked on the den's front door. "I'll get it." He made his way along the passage and through the vestibule to the door. He turned the lock and the door flung open. Gunter marched inside, grabbed Fedor around the throat, and shoved him against the wall. "You got my money." Fedor clawed at Gunter's hand, trying to breathe. "I can't..." Gunter loosened his grip, dropping Fedor to the floor. Fedor rubbed his neck. "You said 3 days." "I did." He narrowed his eyes. "I just need to check you're working on getting it." "We are. We did a job last night, but it failed." Gunter sniffed. "Failure, eh?" He shook his head. "Hanna's joining a gang of losers." "You said 3 days." Melita appeared, wielding a crossbow. "Is there a problem?" Gunter inclined his head at the weapon. "You shouldn't aim things you're not willing to use. What makes you think I won't use it?" He rolled his eyes. "Women and weapons. We all know they don't have the guts to use them." She smiled and cocked the mechanism. "You really want to test that theory?" Gunter grinned and raised his hands. "I was on my way out anyway." He pointed a finger at Fedor and Melita. "You've got 2 days and don't think a knackered old crossbow's going to help you." The door closed, and Melita lowered her crossbow with a sigh. Prick. Fresh wind blew in from the east, bringing with it smells from the Brawn Sea, soaking upper Nordturm's buildings in a gauzy haze. The moon remained hidden behind clouds as Fedor became restless. Come on. Lev glared at him. This isn't an easy lock, mate. He stepped back and gestured to the barred door. You want to try? I still think we should go through the roof. Patience, my friend. The lock clicked, and Lev turned to Fedor with a smug grin. See? He pushed the door open and signalled the all clear. Fedor gave the nod to Yorick and Onwith as he stepped inside the jeweller's. The smell of wood polish filled the air. Gold and silver glinted from behind thick glass cabinets. Steel shutters protected what Fedor assumed would be the most valuable items. Look for cash. He checked each cabinet in turn, hoping one had been left unlocked. There's bound to be a lockbox or safe around. I'm looking, mate. Can't see shit in here. Fedor dragged a sheet from his saber-tash and held it up against a cabinet filled with rings. Will you work your magic? Lev blew out a sigh, hopped the counter, and swung his crowbar at the glass. Nothing. He tried again, this time thrusting it forward. He winced and shook his hand. Damn. Let me try. Fedor gestured for the crowbar. No, mate. That's reinforced. No way we're breaking through with this. He cracked his knuckles. What this needs is a little finesse. Fedor dropped the sheet to the floor and glanced over his shoulder. I don't know if we've got time for finesse. So much doubt, my friend. And I thought you were smart. Lev got to one knee and went to work on the cabinet's lock. He smiled, swung the glass door open and dropped the rings onto the sheet. What are you doing? Lev held the sheet up like a sack and raised an eyebrow. Ah, good thinking. Fedor scanned the cabinets and looked through the steel shutters, his eyes widening at the diamonds. Bloody hell, you could choke a dozen wyverns on some of these stones. 33, Yorick said, leaning inside. Not again. With a sigh, Lev bundled the sheet into a ball and handed it to Fedor. What am I supposed to do with this? Put it back in your pack and run. I had it folded nice. This will be like running with a bloody cannonball strapped to me. Did you not hear the 33, dickhead? He bolted to the door. Come on! Fedor groaned and followed him outside. He raced through the city streets and streaked past the patrolling watch, darting back into the lower city's tunnels, only slowing when they reached the docks. What was with the 33? Lev asked when the crew reunited. Yorick jerked a thumb behind him. Watch patrolling. The watch are always patrolling, mate. They were too close. I didn't want to explain why we were waiting near jewelers in early hours. Lev sighed. Our job would be a lot easier if it weren't for that bunch of bastards. I might have to file a complaint to the magistrates for getting in the way of good business. Yorick chuckled. That would be a new one. Good folk like us should do what the dock workers do and unionize. We've been stomped on for too long. I thought you said unions were a bunch of thieves, Fedor said. Nah, that's different. I just think it stands to reason. Why should they get rights and protections while we have to put our necks on the line every time we go out on a job? Doesn't seem fair to me. Probably because we break law, Yorick said. Laws are there to be broken, Lev said, shaking his head. Yeah, Onwith said. The watch should be standing guard for us while we do jobs. It's so unfair they don't. It's like they only care about legitimate businesses. They should go after the real criminals. Lev nodded. It's a travesty when you think about it. He turned off the docks and followed the tunnels towards the canal. Though I bet the dockers' union's swimming in cash. Yorick shrugged. I doubt it. They grease heptarchy pockets. This is what I'm saying about real criminals, Onwith said. The good, honest, hard-working thieves are held down by corruption. I say it's time we did something. It's time we rose up and freed ourselves from tyranny. Yorick snorted. If you think this is tyranny, perhaps visit Molotok. Your mind will change very quickly. Whatever. Lev shrugged a shoulder. Politics is boring. All I'm saying is that we need to do something about the watch. They're making our lives more difficult than it should be. Don't they know we've got deadlines to keep? Or we could just avoid them, Fedor said. Works for me, Yorick said. Onwith nodded. Yes, that does make sense. We shall avoid the watch and get away from them if they're nearby. Lev stopped and turned to them. That's what we do already. He waved a hand. I'm surrounded by dickheads. If we're dickheads, you're a tosser, Fedor said. You're the tosser, mate. Fedor's laughter echoed along the canal. What is it they say, if it ain't broke? Mate, trust me, it's broke. This whole system's broke. And we're going to be broke if they keep sniffing around our shit. When they reached the den, Fedor found Melita teaching Hanna sleight of hand tricks in the common room. You're up late. We were waiting up for you. Melita looked up from the coins. Did you get what you needed? Fedor shook his head. Not quite. He dragged the sheet from his sabretache, dropped it on the floor and unfastened the knots. Hanna's eyes widened as scores of gold and silver rings glinted under the alchemical light. Wow. Melita reached down and slid a few rings on her fingers. Did you get cash? Lev shrugged. No, we looked but couldn't find any. Melita let out a sigh. Well, I'll have to see if Gunter will take these instead. He won't, Hanna said. Only does stuff with cash. Says handling stuff gets you caught. We'll see. Melita signalled for Lev to take the rings to her office. There's probably 2 or 3 grand's worth of stuff here. Hanna shrugged. He won't have it. Melita smiled. I can be very persuasive when I need to be. Fedor awoke to the sound of banging. He rolled over, nudged Lev awake, and padded along the passage towards the entrance. The door shook, and more knocks came. I'm coming. Keep your hair on. He opened the door and stepped back before the door flew open. Gunter marched inside and looked around. Where is she? Fedor rubbed his eyes. Who? Your boss. Oh. His ears pricked at the sound of approaching footsteps. She's coming. He turned to see Melita holding a crossbow, trailed by Lev and Yorick. Put that thing away. Melita did not move. What do you want? You got my money. I have. She raised her chin. Probably worth 2 or 3 times more than what you're asking. Gunter inclined his head. You trying to screw me? No, but I'm happy to offer you jewellery in exchange for Hanna. Yorick swung the sheet from his shoulder and unfastened the knot. He stood back and gestured to the rings. Gunter looked between Melita and the jewellery and began to laugh. Is this a joke? There's easily 2 grand's worth there. His laughter stopped abruptly and he narrowed his eyes at Melita. Do I look like a fence? I can put you in contact with... I've got contacts coming out my ears, love. Love. Melita raised an eyebrow. Love. Bitch. I don't give a shit what you think I should call you. He took a step forward. I'm not here to play games with a bunch of petty thieves. I want my money. And you gave us 3 days. And I'm a man of my word. He sneered at the rings. Pull crap like this again, and I might start using your friends here as target practice. How's that sound? You will have the money as arranged. Now if you would kindly piss off. She gestured to the door and smiled. I've got a new recruit to train. Tomorrow. Gunter pointed at Melita as he backed towards the door. No more games. Fedor exhaled when Gunter slammed the door behind him and turned to Melita. You think you can sell these rings? She nodded. I can sell them, no problem. But getting a fence to hand over the cash in a day isn't how they usually work. You could negotiate. Oh? Ask for $1,000 if you can get the money today. More profit for them if they go for it. She pushed out her bottom lip. That might just work. She paused and rubbed her chin. Leave it with me. I'll see what I can do. Good idea, Lev said, but we should still get something planned for tonight, just in case. Fedor set his bowl aside, the taste of garlic and fire spice still fresh in his mouth. Yorick picked crab meat from his teeth, as Lev and Onwith played cards. We should make decision, Yorick said, leaning forward. We should vote. I think we should wait until Melita gets back, Fedor said. Yorick cocked an eyebrow. I fail to see why Melita is relevant. Because we'll know whether we need to raise the cash or not. We should act as if she hasn't. Yorick dug his forefinger behind his back teeth. If she has, we pay Gunter and all is good. If she has not, then we have good plan. Lev turned to them both. If the job's good, the job's good. Even if she gets cash, we should do it anyway. Not like we're rolling in it at the moment. Onwith slapped her cards down and jumped to her feet. I win. Settle down. Lev shook his head. What do you think? Onwith blinked at him. About what? She looked around. I wasn't listening. About doing a job. Yes, we must raise money to pay Gunter. A crease set between her brows. Though we should consider whether or not Melita has managed to get someone to buy the rings. That's what we're talking about. Lev sighed and rolled his eyes. I was saying we should do a job regardless. Regardless of what? Lev mumbled a curse under his breath and grabbed the cards to shuffle. Anyone else want to play? Onwith glared at him. What did I do? You just need to pay attention, mate. Keep up. She huffed and folded her arms. Well, excuse me for trying to focus on the game. She raised a finger. And don't think I don't notice when you try to cheat. If you wonder why my attention's on the cards, it's because you can't be trusted. That's enough. Melita glowered at them from the doorway. Fedor looked up at her. Any luck? Not yet. I've got a few more contacts I can try. Hanna followed her into the common room and sidled over to watch the game. Melita sat on the sofa next to Fedor. I don't know if we're going to pull this off. How's she getting on? Fedor gestured with a nod to Hanna. She's good. Picks things up quick, just needs to get out of her shell a little. That'll come. Remember when I first arrived? She nodded and let out a sigh. We were discussing potential job, Yorick said. Oh? We think perhaps Dockers Union. Melita shook her head. I can't see them having ready cash lying around. They'll have used it to bribe customs or whoever. That's what I said. Lev dealt the cards. No, you didn't, Onwith said. I was thinking we'd be better doing a ship, Lev said. Noticed a whaler coming into dock earlier. They're usually loaded with stuff. When have you been on a whaler? Onwith asked. Lev tapped his nose. There's a lot of things you don't know about me, and I intend to keep it that way. Melita took a breath. I agree with Lev. Fedor raised his eyebrows. I've never done a job on a boat before. Never? Melita turned to him. Nope. I just assumed you would have by now. Yorick got to his feet. Those in favour of doing whaler. Lev and Yorick raised their hands. Fedor and Onwith kept theirs down. Lev turned to Melita. What's it to be, boss? She got up and nodded. Go with Lev's idea. I don't think I'll have much luck with the fences. When the last rent boy slunk away from the docks, Fedor climbed onto the whaling ship's deck and looked around, taking in the masts and rigging, and hoped Lev's theory that its crew would be spread between the brothels, bars and boarding houses was correct. Yorick and Onwith remained on the dockside, keeping watch among the crates and lobster pots for signs of the watch or returning sailors. Lev crept ahead, ducking into the shadows and weaving between nets and lifeboats. He flipped open a hatch and disappeared down a set of steep steps. Fedor followed him below deck, the smells of tar and wood smoke mingling with the thick sweat and fish stench. Keeping his head low, he stalked towards the boat's rear, to a room Lev had identified as belonging to the captain. How Lev knew this, Fedor wasn't sure, but his argument about the size of the windows seemed convincing. The ship creaked around him. Lev pulled him into a nook, and they stood still and listened, waiting in the shadows. Fedor stiffened at the concertina music drifting up from the lower decks. You said this ship was empty. I thought it was. You see any lights? Fedor shook his head. We only saw one side of the ship, though. Shit. What do you reckon? 33? No, mate. We've got to get this done. Melita might have sold those rings. We can't bank on mites. Lev signalled for them to keep moving, his head bobbing beneath an oak beam stretching across the ceiling. Fedor squeezed by a set of steep steps descending to the lower decks, his senses on edge. He raced along the deck and reached a door inlaid with a brass image of a breaching humpback. He tested the handle and frowned. Lev elbowed him aside and signalled for Fedor to watch his back as he worked on the lock. The tumbler clunked. Fedor stood tense, his hand reaching for his knife. If sailors found them, there was nowhere to run. Lev gave a nod and teased the door open. He peeked inside and gave Fedor another nod. Inside, Fedor could just make out the black and white checkered floor, the long table displaying a map, and a plush high-back chair standing behind a desk. Lev tapped his right temple and pointed to his chest. Nodding, Fedor scouted the edge of the room, its ceiling much higher than the rest of the deck. A narwhal tusk hung on the wall next to a row of sharp teeth, each tooth the size of a man's head. He tried to picture the creature those teeth once belonged to, imagining it swallowing ships whole, and shuddered at the thought. He moved behind the desk and tried the top drawer. Sighing when it wouldn't budge, he picked the lock and checked inside. A notebook, letters, a pen and ink. He checked the next drawer, and the next, and looked up at Lev with a smile. Gritting his teeth, he heaved the lockbox onto the desk, cringing as it slammed on the tabletop, and set to work on the lock. The mechanism was much tougher to crack than others he'd attempted. Lev signaled for him to take the box with them. "Too heavy," Fedor whispered. Lev shot over to him and tried to lift the box. "Bloody hell, mate, this thing weighs a ton." He gestured to chests resting against the opposite wall. "You try those." He cracked his knuckles. "And I'll get this bad boy open." Fedor glanced at the door. "What about—" "Just be quick." With a nod, Fedor dashed across the room and crouched before the first chest. He picked the lock with ease and flipped open the lid. He squinted at the white candles and took one out to show Lev. "Walrat." "What?" "Spermaceti candles." "I don't know what those words mean." "They're whale-fat candles. Knobs pay a good sum for them." Fedor shrugged and turned his attention to the next chest. The lock seemed stiffer than the first, but it gave after a long moment. He wrinkled his nose at the fishy perfume smell and jerked his hand away from a strange, greasy mass. "What is this?" He held it up at arm's length, tilting his head away from the substance. "That's ambergris, mate." Lev pushed out his bottom lip. "Worth a bit, that stuff." Fedor shook his head and placed it back. "It's disgusting." He looked over to the door, his heartbeat racing. "We need to hurry." "I'm trying." Lev held a finger to his lips and concentrated on the lockbox. Fedor got to his feet and leaned against the wall near the door, listening for movement. Something clicked. Lev rubbed his hands and heaved the box open, his eyes widening. "What is it?" He held up an amputated finger, half rotten and wearing a ring bearing a chunk of cut raven glass. He dragged the ring from the finger and pocketed it. "We've got cash." He gathered a pile of gold coins. 2, 3, 4. Fedor joined him and grimaced at the green-tinged finger resting on the desk. "How much?" "Shut up. I'm counting." He picked up a note and examined it. 9. He handed the coins to Fedor and pocketed the note. "We've got just over $1,000 here, mate. More than enough." "Let's go then." "Grab some of them candles. We can get some good cash for them." Fedor nodded and stuffed a dozen or so candles into his pockets. Lev backed towards the door, surveying the room one last time before heading back along the deck. "That was too easy," Fedor said as they reached the entrance. "What have we got here?" A sailor wearing an eye patch glared from the top of the steps. 33. The sailor pulled a pistol from his belt and aimed it at Lev. Fedor hurled a candle. It bounced off the sailor's head. The sailor shifted his aim and pulled the trigger. Lev dived past him, racing off the boat. Dust and splinters tumbled onto Fedor's shoulder. He ducked to the left, his ears ringing with the blast, and threw another candle. Voices roused below. The sound of footfalls rose through the deck. He met the sailor's eye and raised his hands. "What you doing on here?" The sailor thundered down the steps towards him. "I know what you Sieshas are like, sneaky little..." Fedor threw himself forward, driving a shoulder into the sailor's gut, sending him sprawling. The pistol spun across the floor. The sailor reached for it. Looking between the sailor and the pistol, Fedor shrugged and leapt over his scrambling form, darting up the steps and leaping onto the dockside. A bullet whizzed past him, ricocheting by his feet. He spied Yorick and Lev running into the tunnels, a constable at their rear. A sailor jumped from the upper deck and drew a sword. Fedor shoved him backwards. The sailor teetered on the dockside for a moment, his arms wheeling, his sword clattering onto the stones before splashing into the water. Spotting another sailor aiming a pistol at him from the deck, he turned and ran along the dockside, ignoring the shouts. He streaked through a series of tunnels as voices echoed behind him. When he was sure there was enough space between him and his pursuers, he scaled the wall and rolled into a niche and lay flat against the cave roof. He held his breath, his muscles tense as constables and sailors barreled past. Letting out a breath, he lay and waited for another few minutes before dropping down and making his way back to the den. When he stepped back inside, he found the others waiting for him in the vestibule, their brows etched with concern. "You're alive!" Lev ran over to him and patted his shoulder. You all right, mate? Last thing I heard was a pistol going off. Melita smiled. They were convinced you were dead. Fedor shook his head and grinned. You should give me more credit than that. We must keep low profile, Yorick said. At least until whaling ship leaves port. Good thinking, Onwith said. They had pistols and swords and they looked very angry. I've always said whalers were tough. Imagine having to wrestle an orca or a narwhal. Do you think they ever fight dolphins or manatees? I bet manatees would put up a good fight. Those things look crazy tough. I don't think they wrestle whales, Yorick said. More like point harpoon and shoot. Oh. Onwith's shoulders sagged. That sounds like cheating to me. Hanna appeared from behind Melita and looked up at Fedor. You get the money? Yep. He reached into his pockets and handed the coins to Melita. You have any luck with the rings? No. She folded her arms. We can get a better price anyway if we do it the usual way. Lev pulled the ring from his pocket. I got these. Melita gaped at the raven glass. Wow. Is that... Yeah. His features warped around the pure black jewel. Looks pure too. She took the ring with delicate fingers and dropped it into a pocket. She counted the money, whispering the total under her breath. How much? There's 1,200 krones here. Hanna grinned. That's more than $1,000. Melita nodded and tousled the girl's hair. It certainly is. You won't ever have to go back with him again? She turned to Lev and Fedor. Great work, lads. With this and the jewellery, we've got more than enough to start making some improvements around here, and you should all get a decent cut once I sell the rings. She met Hanna's gaze. Even you? Me? Of course. We share what we earn. You're with us now. That is, of course, if that's what you want. Hanna nodded. Yeah, I like the sound of that. Fedor looked up from his breakfast when there was a knock on the door. That'll be him. He got to his feet and gestured for Lev and Yorick to follow. He opened the door and stepped back, his knife drawn as Gunter sauntered inside, his salt locks bobbing behind him. Gunter narrowed his eyes at Fedor and seemed to stop himself from doing something when he noticed the blade. You better have my money. Melita cleared her throat. We have 1,000 krones. No screwy stuff now. He pulled his coat back, revealing a pistol and club at his belt. Melita held her crossbow, aimed at him, and signalled to Lev. If you'll do the honours. Lev retrieved the money from Melita and handed it to Gunter, counting each coin and note in turn. 1,000 krones. With a sneer, Gunter checked each coin in turn. Satisfied, he pocketed the cash and backed towards the door, his eyes constantly scanning. It's been a pleasure. You agree to leave Hanna alone? Melita said. Well, that's up to her, isn't it? Step foot in my home again, and I might not be so restrained with this. Melita patted her crossbow. Whatever, bitch. He waved a hand and left. Melita exhaled, her shoulders relaxing. Lev shook his head. $1,000. A whole grand. He turned to Hanna. Hope you realise how much we had to do to keep you here. She nodded. Hanna is not to blame for any of this. Melita stepped between them. She is one of us now. Do I make myself clear? As glass. Lev nodded. Sorry, boss, it's just $1,000. He narrowed his eyes at the door. I guess we'll just have to get it back. Raising her eyebrows, Melita smiled. You want to rip off Gunter? I can show you where he lives, Hanna said. Lev grinned and rubbed his hands together. Looks like we've got ourselves a job. Fedor brought his hood up and gazed up at the storehouse. Small windows dotted the walls below the roof. How many doors? Hanna shrugged. There's the big one, and another one round the back. We'll go look, Onwith said, tugging Yorick's arm. What about guards? Melita asked. Gunter doesn't trust guards, it's just him now. Melita sniffed and folded her arms. That's good. This is going to be a piece of piss, Lev said. No guards, simple in and out. Is he a light sleeper? Hanna shrugged again. He drinks rum and falls asleep most nights on the sofa. Excellent. Where does he keep valuable stuff? Fedor asked. He keeps cash in a box on his desk. Right. Is it heavy? Never picked it up. Lev smiled as Onwith and Yorick jogged towards them. What's the verdict? There's one door at the back, Onwith said. Lock looks simple enough. Good. What do you reckon? 4-person job? Yorick nodded. 2 go in, 2 to watch. Very simple. Best make it a 5. Melita narrowed her eyes at the building. No one calls me bitch and gets away with it. That night, Fedor returned to the storehouse with the others while Hanna slept at the den. He ducked into the wind as the others fanned out, taking their places around the building. Lev and Melita crept around the back as Onwith and Yorick kept watch. When he heard the lock click, Fedor made his way to the door to join them. He stepped inside and frowned at the smell of damp and dust. Where did Hanna say the room was? To the left somewhere. As Fedor's eyes adjusted, he could make out the expansive, empty space. You sure? She said this was his place, Melita said. Looks like he's cleared out. Lev sniffed. Yeah, $1,000 would help with that. Either of you got a light? Melita reached into her pocket and shook an alchemical orb until it glowed white. She gripped the chain and held it up at arm's length, averting her gaze from the brightness. Fedor frowned. This isn't the right place. She said it was here. Well, it's not. Lev let out a long sigh. He's done a runner with the cash. It's over. Fedor crouched to one knee and clawed at the dust. This place has been empty for ages. She's got the wrong place. But she seemed so sure, Melita said. It's not the right place. Fedor brushed the dust from his hands. Let's go. Maybe she made a mistake. Lev snorted. Or maybe she's full of shit. I'm calling a 33. Deflated, Fedor traipsed back through the lower city, taking a convoluted route back to avoid passing the docks. When they reached the den, Fedor stopped and gestured to the open door. Melita turned to the others and glared. Who left this open? No one. You locked it. Remember. Lev barged inside and Fedor followed. Papers and clothing lay strewn across the vestibule floor. Where's Hanna? Melita spun and raced to their shared room. We've been ransacked, Lev muttered, holding up a torn courier disguise. Bunch of thieving bastards. Fedor's jaw tightened. Gunter did this. We don't know that for sure, mate. Hanna's gone, Melita said, the colour draining from her cheeks. And he's taken the jewels and crossbow. You've still got the Ravenglass ring, haven't you? She shook her head. Damn it. Fedor's nostrils flared. All right, Lev said. It's definitely Gunter. Must have had the same idea as us. We need to find Hanna. Melita marched to the exit. Whoa, whoa, whoa! Lev spun as she passed. Where you going? I'm going to find Hanna. Just give us a second. We're coming with you. Fedor joined Melita, and they headed out onto the canal side. Hanna. Where do you reckon she is? Fedor asked. Melita shrugged. I don't know. Fedor pivoted at the sound of footsteps behind him. Yorick. We check down here, Yorick said. You 3 check upper city. Good idea, Melita said. Follow me. Fedor emerged outside as the first rays of sunlight pricked the horizon to the east. Melita tapped a constable's shoulder. Have you seen a girl? I see a lot of things. You'll have to be more specific. Black hair, pale skin, dark eyes, this tall. The constable shook his head. Sorry, not seen a girl. She might be with a man, she added. White salt locks, stocky. Sounds like Gunter to me. Yes, Gunter. Have you seen him? The constable shrugged. Not for a while. Why? Melita jogged on without answering, as Lev dropped down to the beach, combing the sand. He caught up to them by the time they crossed the Kuston Road. Ask him, Fedor said, gesturing to a beggar. Melita ran over. Do you know Gunter? The man looked up at her and blinked, his eyes rimmed with purple. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. Well, do you? He rubbed a thumb and forefinger together. What's it worth to you? It's worth me not stomping on your balls. The man pulled his knees up to his chin. I seen him head into the airships. Was he with anyone? Melita reached down and grabbed his collar. No. Damn it. She released her grip. Yes. He rubbed his beard. He was with that girl he runs with. They was in a hurry. Thanks. Fedor gave the man a nod and raced towards the hot air balloons bulging in the distance. A guard blocked their way when they reached the ticket booth. You're late. Next balloon's... I don't care about that, Fedor said. Did a bloke with white salt locks come through with a girl? Yes, he's a... Fedor vaulted the barrier and raced towards the airships. He started at the sound of billowing flames. A whistle blew. Wyverns flapped their wings, their calls shrill. Melita and Lev staggered to a halt as the balloon left the ground. Wyverns took the tension of towing ropes as they rose into the air. Fedor pointed to the passenger cabin. There. Gunter and Hanna waved at them, their wide grins turning to laughter. Melita gaped at the balloon. He's got her. Lev shook his head. No, mate, they got us. Fedor frowned as realization dawned. She conned us? Melita glared at the balloon. The little thief. Yep. Lev gestured to the fading balloon. Now, that's how you run a good con. The end. Thanks for listening. Remember to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future stories. The Little Thief is a prequel to Dawn of Assassins by John Cronshaw, available now. This work is copyright 2021 by John Cronshaw. All rights